In the early 18th century, the death of Emperor Charles VI threw the Habsburg Empire, which comprises of an expansive realm comprising the Austrian hereditary lands, the Kingdom of Bohemia, Hungary, Croatia, and the Austrian Netherlands, into a state of uncertainty. With no male heir, Charles had worked tirelessly to ensure his daughter, Maria Theresa, could inherit the throne, crafting the Pragmatic Sanction. Nations across Europe had agreed to respect this decree, but the ink had barely dried before rivals began to eye the rich lands of the Habsburg monarchy. Maria Theresa's ascension in 1740 marked the beginning of the War of Austrian Succession, as powers like Prussia, France, Spain, and Bavaria questioned her legitimacy and coveted Habsburg territories. This conflict tested the sovereignty of a female monarch in a male-dominated European political landscape and the durability of the Habsburg legacy amidst rival ambitions. The War of Austrian Succession was not confined to a single battlefield, but erupted across Europe. Frederick the Great of Prussia seized the initiative, capturing Silesia with a blend of military brilliance and audacity, challenging Maria Theresa's rule and setting the tone for the war. Battles raged from the snow-capped Alps to the fertile fields of Bohemia, as France, Spain, and Bavaria joined the fray, each seeking to expand their power at the expense of the Habsburg monarchy. The war was a chessboard of alliances, betrayals, and military engagements that reshaped the map of Europe, demonstrating the volatile nature of 18th century politics and warfare. Amidst the turmoil of war, Maria Theresa emerged as a figurehead and the heart and soul of the Habsburg defense. Facing down the challenges to her rule, she demonstrated remarkable resilience, reforming her military and government to withstand the pressures of the conflict. Her leadership galvanized her people, earning her widespread respect and loyalty. Maria Theresa's determination to secure her throne and safeguard her empire's integrity showcase her strength and character, shaping the legacy of one of Europe's most formidable ruling dynasties. The War of Austrian Succession concluded in 1748 with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, a peace agreement that restored territories to their pre-war rulers, but left many issues unresolved. The treaty was a diplomatic compromise, aimed at ending immediate hostilities but failing to address the deeper causes of the conflict. While Maria Theresa retained her throne and most of her dominions, the loss of Silesia to Prussia was a bitter pill to swallow, setting the stage for future rivalries. The agreement saw European powers return to a precarious balance, but beneath the surface, ambitions and resentment simmered. In the aftermath, the focus of imperial rivalry shifted towards overseas colonies, where Britain and France vied for dominance. The Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle was less a resolution than a temporary pause in the ongoing struggle for global supremacy. North America and India, with their vast resources and strategic importance, became the new battlegrounds. The seeds of the 7 Years' War were sown in these unresolved tensions, as the desire for expansion and control over trade routes intensified. As the mid-18th century dawned, Europe was a chessboard of complex alliances and rivalries. The aftermath of the War of Austrian Succession had left a delicate balance, with traditional alliances like Britain and Austria on one side, and France and Prussia on the other, maintaining an uneasy peace. Yet beneath the surface, discontent and ambition stirred. Nations were re-evaluating their positions, seeking greater security and advantage. The stage was set for a seismic shift in alliances, a diplomatic revolution that would redraw the lines of European power and set old partners against each other. The intricate dance of diplomacy was about to take a dramatic turn, driven by the dual engines of strategic realignment and the unyielding quest for dominance. In 1756, the unthinkable happened. Centuries-old enemies France and Austria, driven by mutual fear of Prussian aggression and seeking to counterbalance British naval power, buried their ancient rivalries to form a new coalition. This alliance, once unimaginable, was a clear indication of the volatile nature of diplomatic relations and the prevailing winds of pragmatism over historical enmity. Meanwhile, Britain, finding itself isolated, turned to Prussia, an emerging power under the ambitious Frederick the Great. This stunning reversal of alliances, known as the Diplomatic Revolution, reshaped the European political landscape, tearing down the old order and setting the stage for a new era of conflict. It was a clear sign that in the great game of power, Yesterday's enemy could be today's friend, and vice versa. The diplomatic revolution of 1756 set the chess pieces of Europe in motion, not toward peace, but toward an even greater conflict. The new alliances formed a tinderbox, with Britain and Prussia on one side, and France, Austria, and Russia on the other, each bloc wary of the other's power and intentions. The mutual distrust and strategic positioning soon ignited the spark that would lead to the 7 Years' War. It was a war that would not be contained to Europe, but would stretch across the globe, from the forests of North America to the plains of India, as empires vied for supremacy. The diplomatic revolution had not only reshaped alliances, but had set the world on a path to a war of unprecedented scale and ferocity. The diplomatic revolution of 1756 was a realignment of alliances and a watershed moment that fundamentally altered the course of history. Its immediate consequence was the 7 Years' War, a conflict that redrew the map of the world and reshaped the destiny of empires. But its legacy was even more profound, setting new norms for international relations and diplomacy. The revolution underscored the fluidity of alliances and the importance of strategic flexibility, principles that continue to influence global politics to this day. In the aftermath, European powers recognized the necessity of a balance of power, a concept that became a cornerstone of international diplomacy. The idea that no single state should dominate the continent led to the development of a more sophisticated diplomatic system, aiming to maintain stability through checks and balances. In the serene countryside of Europe, an unexpected source of conflict emerged that mirrored the continent's broader rivalries: beekeeping. As the 18th century progressed, the demand for beeswax surged, driven by its essential role in religious ceremonies, in the illumination of homes and palaces, and as a staple in the burgeoning industries of trade and communication. Bees, the humble workers of the fields, became unwitting participants in a struggle for economic dominance as nations vied to control the wax trade. This competition set the stage for the Wax Wars, a lesser-known but telling precursor to larger conflicts, illustrating how the quest for resources fueled rivalries in both grand and mundane aspects of life. As European demand for wax grew, so did the intensity of competition among beekeepers. What started as a peaceful pursuit turned into a cutthroat rivalry, mirroring the political tensions of the time. In regions famed for their beekeeping, such as the lush valleys of France and the rich fields of Germany, the increasing number of apiaries led to disputes over territory and bee foraging rights. Trade fairs became battlegrounds of commerce, where the value of wax could make or break fortunes. This escalating competition for beeswax, a seemingly minor commodity, reflected the broader economic battles of the era, demonstrating how the pursuit of resources underpinned the rivalries that would later erupt into open conflict. As tensions escalated, particularly in the contested frontiers of North America and India, the stage was set for a global conflict that would redraw the map of the world. The 7 Years' War, known as the First World War, was brewing, a war that would involve every great power of the time and span 5 continents. As we delve deeper into the mid-18th century, the ambitions of empires were not confined to the European continent, but extended across the vast oceans to the rich and untamed lands of North America and India. Britain and France, leading the charge for colonial dominance, found themselves locked in a struggle for control over these lucrative territories, setting the stage for a conflict that would span the globe. In the mid-18th century, the Ohio Valley emerged as a contested frontier, coveted by both the British and French empires. This fertile land, home to diverse indigenous nations, became a stage for European rivalries transplanted to the New World. The British, eyeing westward expansion, and the French, seeking to connect their Canadian and Louisiana territories, built a network of forts, asserting their claims and challenging each other's presence. As tensions escalated, skirmishes between British settlers, French troops, and Native American allies grew more frequent, setting the stage for a larger confrontation. The Ohio Valley was not just a regional flashpoint, but a fuse that threatened to ignite a broader war. In early 1754, a young lieutenant colonel in the Virginia militia, named George Washington, led an expedition into the contested territory, tasked with defending British claims. Following a tense encounter, and a skirmish that resulted in the death of a French envoy, Washington retreated to a meadow called Great Meadows and constructed Fort Necessity. The hastily built fortification, a circular stockade surrounded by the dense woods of the Appalachian Mountains, was a symbol of British resolve, but also of their precarious position on the frontier. Washington hoped it would serve as a bulwark against French retaliation, but the fort's vulnerabilities were apparent, highlighting the desperation and the high stakes of the unfolding conflict. On July 3, 1754, French forces, along with their Native American allies, launched an attack on Fort Necessity. The battle, fought in a downpour that turned the fort's surroundings into a quagmire, was George Washington's first military engagement and a brutal introduction to the realities of warfare. Despite the fort's strategic shortcomings and being heavily outnumbered, Washington and his men mounted a valiant defense. However, as casualties mounted and ammunition dwindled, the reality of their situation became clear. The Battle of Fort Necessity would end in defeat for the young Washington, forcing him to surrender and retreat, an early setback that foreshadowed the broader escalation of hostilities into the global conflict known as the 7 Years' War. The defeat at Fort Necessity was a military setback for the British and a harbinger of the widespread conflict that would soon engulf continents. The battle underscored the complexities of fighting in the New World, where European tactics met the realities of wilderness warfare, and where alliances with Native American nations often tipped the scales. For George Washington, the experience was formative, shaping the future American leaders' understanding of military leadership and diplomacy. The Battle of Fort Necessity, though a small engagement in the expanse of the French and Indian War, marked the beginning of hostilities that would escalate into the 7 Years' War, a global struggle that would redraw the map of the world. In its aftermath, the British military would re-evaluate its strategies and tactics, leading to reforms that aimed at adapting to the unique conditions of North American warfare. This early encounter in the wilderness also illuminated the critical importance of alliances with Native American tribes, whose knowledge of the land and guerrilla tactics were invaluable. The French, leveraging these alliances more effectively at the time, gained an early advantage in the struggle for control over North America. The Battle of Fort Necessity, though seemingly a minor skirmish in the vast wilderness of North America, was a spark that ignited a larger powder keg of global tension. It demonstrated how localized conflicts could escalate, drawing distant powers into a worldwide confrontation. As news of the battle reached the courts of Europe, it became clear that the struggle for supremacy in North America was but a part of a larger contest for global dominance. The 7 Years' War, which would soon erupt, was not confined to any single theater, but was a war that spanned continents, from the forests of North America to the plains of India, the waters of the Caribbean to the heartlands of Europe. The Battle of Fort Necessity was a harbinger of this global conflict, underscoring the interconnectedness of empires and the far-reaching consequences of colonial ambitions. As the 18th century unfolded, India became a chessboard for European powers, with the British and French East India companies vying for control over trade, territories, and the favor of local rulers. This competition was more than a commercial rivalry. It was a clash of empires, with both Britain and France seeking to extend their influence across the globe. In the backdrop of this struggle, the strategic port city of Madras became a focal point, a jewel both powers were eager to claim. The Siege of Madras in 1758 to 1759 was a battle for a city and a manifestation of a global contest for economic and military dominance, thousands of miles from the European homeland. In late 1758, the French, under the command of the Count de Lally, launched an ambitious assault on Madras, seeking to deal a decisive blow to British power in India. The French blockade cut off the city from the sea, while land forces surrounded Madras, preparing for an extended siege. Inside the city, British forces, alongside Indian sepoys loyal to the East India Company, fortified their positions, determined to hold out against the French onslaught. The siege of Madras was a test of endurance and resolve, with both sides keenly aware that the outcome would have far-reaching implications for their imperial ambitions in India and beyond. As weeks turned into months, the siege of Madras strained both the defenders and attackers. Inside the city, shortages of food and water, coupled with the threat of disease, tested the resolve of the British and their allies. Despite the hardships, the city's defenders, a mix of British soldiers, Indian sepoys and civilian volunteers, showed remarkable resilience, repelling assaults and enduring the bombardment. Outside the walls, the French and their Indian allies faced their challenges, battling the elements and the stubborn resistance of the city. The siege became a war of attrition, with both sides suffering heavy losses but neither willing to concede defeat. In February 1759, after months of hardship, the siege of Madras was lifted. British naval reinforcements arriving just in time broke the French blockade, delivering much-needed supplies and reinforcements to the city. Faced with this turn of events and the deteriorating condition of his forces, the Count de Lally ordered a withdrawal, ending the French bid to capture Madras. The lifting of the siege was a moment of immense relief for the city's defenders and a turning point in the Anglo-French rivalry in India. Madras had endured, symbolizing British resilience and marking a crucial victory that would have implications for the broader struggle for supremacy in India and beyond. The aftermath of the siege saw the city of Madras slowly recovering from the brink of disaster. The British East India Company, bolstered by this victory, reinforced its positions and prepared for further confrontations. The resilience displayed by the defenders of Madras became a rallying point for British efforts in India, underscoring the determination of the British to maintain and expand their influence in the face of French challenges. The successful defense of Madras against the French siege had repercussions far beyond its walls. In the grand salons of Europe, the outcome was closely analyzed, affecting the strategic calculations of both the British and French empires. The British victory at Madras secured a critical trading post and demonstrated the effectiveness of their military and naval strategies in distant lands. It signaled a shift in the balance of power in India, with the British East India Company gaining a stronger foothold and the French realizing the challenges of projecting power across the globe. For the French, the siege's failure prompted a re-evaluation of their colonial strategies and ambitions, highlighting the difficulties of sustaining long-distance military campaigns. The Siege of Madras, while a single episode in the larger 7 Years' War, illustrated the global nature of the conflict, where battles fought thousands of miles from European capitals could have a significant impact on the outcome of the war and the fate of empires. The Siege of Madras in 1758 to 1759, though a moment of acute crisis, played a pivotal role in the establishment of British dominance in India. Its successful defense against formidable odds was not just a military victory, but a foundational moment in the narrative of British imperial expansion. The siege exemplified the complexities of colonial warfare, where European conflicts were transplanted onto foreign lands, intertwining with local politics and changing the course of history. In the years that followed, the British East India Company would leverage the prestige of this victory to expand its influence, laying the groundwork for what would eventually become the British Raj. The Siege of Madras became a part of the collective memory, igniting the challenges and sacrifices involved in the building of an empire. As Europe stood on the brink of what would become the 7 Years' War, a silent battle was already underway. A war of shadows, where spies and informants played a critical role. In the grand capitals of Britain and France, espionage became a key instrument of statecraft, with both powers seeking to uncover the intentions and capabilities of the other. Secret networks of spies infiltrated diplomatic circles, gathering intelligence that would shape the strategies of empires. This hidden conflict, often overlooked, laid the groundwork for the confrontations to come, demonstrating the lengths to which nations would go to secure an advantage before the first shots were even fired. The espionage efforts of Britain and France were underpinned by a range of sophisticated techniques and tools. Coded messages written in complex ciphers were carried across borders by trusted couriers, while spies employed a variety of disguises and false identities to evade detection. Intelligence gathering was an art, requiring not only bravery and cunning, but also a keen analytical mind capable of piecing together disparate pieces of information into a coherent strategic picture. The successes and failures of these espionage operations could determine the outcome of battles before they began, making the codebreakers and spies as important as the generals and admirals who commanded the armies and fleets. The intelligence gathered by spies had a profound impact on the pre-war strategies of both Britain and France. Information about troop movements, fortifications, and even the personal weaknesses of military leaders became ammunition in the strategic planning of both nations. On several occasions, the fate of entire campaigns was altered by the timely interception of a message or the betrayal of a key informant. Espionage allowed nations to anticipate their adversaries' moves, plan countermeasures, and sometimes avoid traps set by the enemy. In the shadowy world of 18th century espionage, knowledge was power, and those who mastered the art of intelligence could shape the destinies of empires. Behind the geopolitical maneuverings and strategic calculations were the personal stories of the spies themselves, unsung heroes and sometimes villains of the era. These individuals operated in a world of constant danger, where discovery often meant disgrace, imprisonment, or even death. Yet their contributions were pivotal, often changing the course of history from the shadows. Their motivations varied, from patriotic duty to the thrill of the clandestine life or the promise of reward. Yet each faced the moral ambiguities of a life built on deception, where the line between right and wrong was often blurred. The stories of these spies, though rarely celebrated in history books, offer a fascinating glimpse into the human aspect of the silent war that preceded and pervaded the global conflict. As these colonial rivalries and diplomatic failures compounded, the European powers were drawn into a conflict that none could afford to lose. The stage was set for the 7 Years' War, a conflict that would see alliances tested, empires stretched to their limits, and the world order irrevocably changed. As the 7 Years' War escalated, it quickly transformed into the First True World War, with battles raging across continents. Each theater of war presented its unique challenges and dynamics, shaping the course of the conflict and the strategies of the combatants. As Europe edged closer to the brink of widespread conflict, Prussia, a burgeoning kingdom that spanned parts of present-day Germany, Poland, Russia, Lithuania, Denmark, Belgium, and the Czech Republic, found itself in a dire predicament. Surrounded by the formidable coalition of Austria, France, Russia, and Sweden, the survival of Frederick the Great's kingdom hung in the balance. With tensions mounting, Frederick knew that the integrity of Prussia depended on swift and decisive action. The stage was set for a confrontation that would not only determine the fate of Prussia, but also showcase the military acumen of one of the era's greatest tacticians. The Battle of Rosbach loomed on the horizon, a pivotal moment that would test the mettle of Frederick and his army. On the eve of November 5, 1757, the countryside near Rosbach bristled with the activity of two armies preparing for battle. The Franco-Imperial forces, confident in their numerical superiority, looked forward to a swift victory over the Prussians. Meanwhile, Frederick's troops, although outnumbered, trusted in the skill of their leader and the strength of their discipline. The disparity in numbers was stark, with the Prussians vastly outnumbered. Yet the Prussian army was a finely tuned instrument of war, ready to face the looming challenge with unwavering resolve. The stage was set for a confrontation that would defy expectations and alter the course of the war. As the battle commenced, Frederick's strategic genius quickly became apparent. Leveraging the mobility of his forces and the element of surprise, the Prussians executed a series of daring maneuvers that left the Franco-Imperial army reeling. The Prussian cavalry, leading the charge, sowed chaos among the enemy ranks, while the disciplined Prussian infantry delivered precise and devastating volleys. In a matter of hours, the battlefield was transformed into a scene of total disarray for the coalition forces. The Prussians, under Frederick's command, achieved a stunning victory, routing an enemy that outnumbered them 2-1. The Battle of Rosbach was a masterclass in tactical warfare, with Frederick's forces leaving the field virtually unscathed. The aftermath of the Battle of Rosbach reverberated throughout Europe. The decisive victory against a superior enemy force not only safeguarded Prussia's sovereignty, but also elevated Frederick the Great to legendary status. Across the continent, allies and adversaries alike reassessed their views of Prussia, now seen as a formidable power capable of defying the odds. The victory at Rosbach became a symbol of Prussian military prowess and strategic brilliance, galvanizing support for Frederick both domestically and abroad. The morale of the Prussian army soared, bolstered by the knowledge that their king was a master tactician capable of securing victory against overwhelming odds. In the salons and courts of Europe, the victory shifted diplomatic calculations. Powers that had underestimated Prussia began to reconsider their positions, while Frederick's enemies were forced to acknowledge his skill and the tenacity of his forces. Rosbach, therefore, was not merely a battle won but a statement made, altering the balance of power and perceptions of strength in the 7 Years' War. As 1757 drew to a close on December 5, 1757, near the village of Leuthen in Silesia, now in Poland, Prussia found itself in a precarious position, with Frederick the Great facing the daunting prospect of confronting a much larger Austrian army. The Prussian king, undeterred by the overwhelming odds, prepared his troops for a battle that would be a true test of their discipline and his strategic prowess. The march to Leuthen, under the harsh conditions of the Silesian winter, was a prelude to what many expected to be a desperate stand against the Austrians. Frederick's leadership and the spirit of his soldiers were about to be tested as never before. At Leuthen, Frederick the Great executed one of the most celebrated tactical maneuvers of his military career. By feigning weakness on his right and concentrating his forces on the unsuspecting left flank of the Austrians, Frederick managed to turn the numerical superiority of his foes into a liability. This masterful stroke, executed with precision and daring, allowed the Prussian army to engage the Austrians in a manner that maximized their tactical strengths while exploiting the enemy's weaknesses. The Battle of Leuthen would come to be seen as a textbook example of military ingenuity and the power of well-executed strategy. As the battle raged, the Prussian forces, inspired by Frederick's leadership and fueled by their rigorous training, pressed their attack with relentless vigor. The Austrian army, caught off guard by the audacity and precision of the Prussian maneuver, found itself in disarray. The Prussians exploited this confusion, driving deep into the Austrian lines and capturing key positions. The victory at Leuthen was a demonstration of the Prussian army's superior discipline and the effectiveness of Frederick's unconventional tactics. Against all expectations, the Prussians emerged victorious, cementing Frederick's legacy as a military genius. The victory at Leuthen had far-reaching consequences, not just for the outcome of the 7 Years' War, but for the future of Prussia and Europe. Frederick the Great's triumph against the odds bolstered Prussia's military prestige and secured its position as a rising power on the continental stage. The battle's innovative tactics and Frederick's inspirational leadership would be studied by generations of military leaders, shaping the evolution of warfare. Leuthen became a symbol of Prussian resilience and the strategic genius of its king, underscoring the indomitable spirit that would drive Prussia's emergence as a dominant European power. Across the Atlantic in North America, the conflict known as the French and Indian War saw British and colonial American forces pitted against the French and their Native American allies. As the French and Indian War raged across the forests and valleys of North America, the British set their sights on Quebec City, the heart of French power in the continent. Positioned atop steep cliffs and protected by massive walls, Quebec was a fortress city, seemingly impregnable. Its capture would require careful planning and bold execution. For the British, taking Quebec represented more than a military objective. It was the key to dominating North America and crippling French colonial ambitions. The stage was set for a confrontation that would alter the fate of a continent. In the summer of 1759, British forces under General James Wolfe embarked on a perilous journey down the St. Lawrence River, aiming to lay siege to Quebec. Wolfe, a young but determined commander, understood the daunting task ahead. Opposing him, the Marquis de Montcalm, a seasoned French general, prepared his troops for the defense of the city. Both leaders faced immense challenges, from navigating the difficult terrain to maintaining the morale of their troops. As the British laid siege, both sides engaged in skirmishes, but Wolfe sought a decisive engagement that would force the city's surrender. In a bold move, Wolfe's forces scaled the cliffs west of Quebec under the cloak of night, managing to surprise Montcalm by establishing a battle line on the Plains of Abraham, just outside the city walls. On the morning of September 13, 1759, the stage was set for a battle that would last less than an hour but decide the future of North America. Both generals, aware of the battle's significance, led their troops into the fray. The clash was intense and swift, with the disciplined British lines advancing under heavy fire. The French, caught off guard and unable to hold their ground, were overwhelmed. Both Wolfe and Montcalm were mortally wounded, their leadership inspiring their men to the end. The Battle of the Plains of Abraham was a turning point in the French and Indian War. With the French defeat, Quebec City, the jewel of New France, fell into British hands. The capture of Quebec did not immediately end French resistance, but it marked a significant shift in the balance of power in North America. The loss of Quebec was a devastating blow to French colonial ambitions, effectively sealing the fate of New France. For the British, it was a monumental victory, expanding their dominance in North America and paving the way for future conquests. The capture of Quebec City and the pivotal Battle of the Plains of Abraham reverberated through the corridors of power across the Atlantic, signaling a new era in the history of North America. The Treaty of Paris in 1763, which formally concluded the French and Indian War, ceded vast territories from France to Britain, dramatically altering the continent's geopolitical landscape. This momentous shift marked the rise of British dominance in North America and signaled the beginning of the end for French colonial ambitions on the continent. The impact of the battle and the subsequent British victory were profoundly felt by the indigenous populations, who faced new challenges and uncertainties under British rule. The shifting power dynamics forced many Native American tribes to renegotiate their alliances and strategies for survival in a rapidly changing world. In the sweltering heat of the Indian subcontinent, the French and British East India Companies clashed over the control of Madras, a key port city critical for dominance over southern India's trade routes. As French forces surrounded the city, cutting off sea and land routes, the inhabitants of Madras prepared for a siege that would test their resolve. The city's defenses, manned by a mix of British soldiers, local sepoys, and civilian volunteers, stood ready to face the French assault. Understanding the city's fall could shift the regional power balance. Within the besieged city of Madras, a unique alliance formed between British commanders and their Indian counterparts. Together, they orchestrated a defense that leveraged their combined knowledge of European military tactics and local conditions. This collaboration proved crucial in maintaining morale and fortifying the city against the French onslaught. The siege, while testing the limits of endurance, showcased the effectiveness of cross-cultural military cooperation, setting a precedent for future engagements in the subcontinent. The Battle of Plassey in 1757 marked a pivotal moment in British ambitions in India. Under the command of Robert Clive, a small but determined British force confronted the Nawab of Bengal's army, a force many times their size. The battle's outcome hinged on military prowess and strategic alliances and betrayals. Clive's negotiations with key members of the Nawab's court ensured a portion of the opposing forces switched sides at a critical juncture, leading to a decisive British victory. The Battle of Plassey was the dawn of British ascendancy in India, illustrating the power of diplomacy and intelligence in warfare. The victories at Madras and Plassey reshaped the Indian subcontinent's political landscape, marking the rise of British power in the region. The control of Bengal, a rich and fertile land, provided the British East India Company with unparalleled resources, fundamentally altering the balance of power. These events marked the beginning of nearly 2 centuries of British influence over India, fundamentally changing its history, culture, and society. The Siege of Madras and the Battle of Plassey were the first steps in the formation of the British Raj, which would leave an indelible mark on India and its people. Robert Clive's decisive role in the Battle of Plassey and his contributions to the British victory at Madras cemented his place as a pivotal figure in the history of British India. Dubbed Clive of India, his strategies and leadership secured British dominance in the region and sparked a broader conversation about the nature of empire and the responsibilities of power. His return to Britain was met with accolades and controversy alike, as the wealth and influence gained through these victories raised questions about the ethics of colonial rule and the exploitation of Indian resources. Clive's legacy is a complex mix of military genius, strategic statecraft, and the moral dilemmas of empire building, reflecting the broader implications of British ascendancy in India. The aftermath of the Siege of Madras and the Battle of Plassey initiated a period of profound change in India. The ascendancy of British power reshaped the subcontinent's economic, political, and social fabric. Traditional power structures were upended as the British East India Company transitioned from a commercial entity to a governing force, exerting control over vast territories and populations. The impact of these changes was felt by all levels of Indian society, from the princely states that found themselves navigating a new political landscape to the common people who faced the realities of life under colonial rule. The events of 1757 were catalysts that transformed India, setting the stage for its future as part of the British Empire. Before the 7 Years' War cast its shadow over North America, the continent was a mosaic of indigenous nations and European settlements. Life on the frontier was governed by a delicate balance of cooperation and competition, with Native American tribes and European colonists navigating a complex landscape of cultural and economic exchanges. Traditional ways of life, honed over centuries, allowed indigenous communities to thrive, while European settlers sought to carve out new lives in the New World. This period of relative peace, however, was soon to be disrupted by the winds of war, bringing unforeseen challenges to the doorstep of civilian populations. As the 7 Years' War expanded to North America, the conflict known as the French and Indian War brought violence and upheaval to the continent. Indigenous communities, long the masters of the land, found their territories turned into battlegrounds between European powers. The war disrupted traditional ways of life, forcing tribes to choose sides in a foreign conflict that threatened their very existence. European settlers too faced sieges and raids, with homes and livelihoods destroyed in the blink of an eye. The impact of the war on civilian populations was profound, leading to significant displacement and suffering as people across the continent were caught in the turmoil. The war's pressures forced a reassessment of alliances and power dynamics among Native American tribes and between indigenous communities and European settlers. Some tribes saw an opportunity to strengthen their positions by allying with one European power against another, while others sought to remain neutral, hoping to avoid the conflict's devastation. These decisions were fraught with risk and consequence, as shifting alliances could mean the difference between survival and destruction. The war altered the political landscape of North America and reshaped the relationships and power dynamics among its peoples, leaving a lasting legacy on the continent's social fabric. The true cost of the 7 Years' War, particularly its impact on civilian populations and indigenous communities, cannot be measured solely in battles won or lost. Beyond the strategic victories and territorial conquests lay the stories of individuals and communities forever changed by the conflict. The war brought grief, loss, and displacement, but it also sparked resilience and determination. Indigenous communities fought to preserve their cultures and ways of life against overwhelming odds, while European settlers confronted the challenges of rebuilding and adapting to a new order. The 7 Years' War, often described as the first global conflict, began as a series of localized disputes that quickly spiraled into a worldwide struggle for power and dominance. As European powers clashed over territories and influence, the conflict ignited, drawing colonies and allies into a vast conflagration. The war's early stages were marked by a dizzying array of maneuvers and countermaneuvers as nations vied to outdo one another in a grand chess game of military and diplomatic strategy. In North America, the French and Indian War, as part of the larger 7 Years' War, saw British and French colonial empires clashing over control of the rich and strategically vital territories. The conflict was characterized by brutal wilderness fighting, sieges of key forts, and pivotal battles that involved complex alliances with various Native American tribes. The struggle for North America was a contest of European powers and a battle that involved and profoundly affected indigenous peoples, with significant shifts in alliances and power dynamics. The outcome of this theater had lasting implications, setting the stage for future American independence and shaping the continent's geopolitical landscape. The 7 Years' War was truly global in scope, affecting regions far beyond the European continent. In India, the Battle of Plassey marked the beginning of British ascendancy, altering the balance of power in the subcontinent. In the Caribbean and Africa, European powers fought fiercely over strategic ports and trade routes, with the war impacting the global economy and trade networks. The conflict redrew maps and set the stage for future revolutions and independence movements, leaving a legacy that would influence global affairs for centuries to come. In the summer of 1759, Frederick the Great led his Prussian army towards Kunersdorf, near the Oder River, aiming to deliver a decisive blow against the combined forces of Russia and Austria. The march was grueling, but the spirit of the Prussian soldiers remained unbroken. driven by the leadership of their king and the crucial stakes of the impending battle. Frederick, known for his military genius, faced the daunting task of defeating a larger enemy force, a challenge that would test his strategic acumen and the resilience of his army to their limits. As the Prussian forces arrived at Kunersdorf, they were met with a daunting sight. The Russian and Austrian armies had secured the high ground, positioning their troops and artillery in a formidable defensive stance. The enemy's numbers dwarfed Frederick's forces, and the strategic disadvantage was stark. Despite the overwhelming odds, Frederick resolved to press the attack, a decision driven by the necessity of victory, but fraught with peril. The stage was set for a battle that would be remembered as one of the bloodiest and most challenging of the 7 Years' War. The Battle of Kunersdorf unfolded with ferocious intensity, as Prussian troops engaged the enemy in a desperate attempt to overcome their strategic disadvantage. Frederick's initial assaults were met with relentless artillery fire and stubborn resistance from the Russian and Austrian lines. The Prussians fought with valor, pushing forward against a hail of fire, but the enemy's position proved too formidable. As the battle wore on, the Prussian army suffered devastating losses, and the hope of a decisive victory slipped away. The sheer scale of the bloodshed and the courage of the Prussian soldiers in the face of overwhelming odds marked Kunersdorf as a turning point in the war. The aftermath of the Battle of Kunersdorf was a scene of devastation. Frederick the Great surveyed the battlefield, where so many of his soldiers had fallen. The defeat was crushing, leaving Prussia's military might severely weakened and its future uncertain. Yet in this moment of despair, Frederick's resolve did not waver. His determination to continue the fight, to rebuild his army and defend his kingdom, underscored the resilience of Prussia. Despite the setback at Kunersdorf, Frederick's leadership and the spirit of his forces remained unbroken, setting the stage for the challenging campaigns that lay ahead. Fort Niagara stood as a bastion of French power in North America, guarding the critical passage between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. Its position made it a keystone in the network of French forts and supply lines that supported their military and trading operations throughout the Great Lakes region and the Ohio Valley. For the British, capturing Fort Niagara was pivotal, not merely for its symbolic value, but for its strategic importance in cutting off French access to their western territories and isolating their forces in Canada. The siege of Fort Niagara was thus seen as a crucial step in the British campaign to dismantle the French colonial presence in North America. In the summer of 1759, British and colonial American forces, augmented by Native American allies, converged on Fort Niagara, determined to seize control from the French. Under the command of Sir William Johnson and bolstered by the strategic acumen of engineers and artillerymen, the British commenced a methodical siege. The surrounding woodlands echoed with the roar of cannon and the clash of arms as skirmishes flared around the fort's perimeter. The British strategy focused on isolating the fort, cutting off any hope of reinforcement or resupply for the besieged French garrison, and gradually wearing down its defenses through relentless bombardment. After weeks of relentless siege, the defenses of Fort Niagara finally crumbled under the sustained British assault. The fort's fall marked a turning point in the campaign, delivering a crippling blow to the French strategic position in North America. The capture of Fort Niagara was celebrated by the British and their allies as a significant triumph, symbolizing the effectiveness of their strategy to isolate and methodically capture French strongholds across the continent. For the French, the loss of Fort Niagara signaled the beginning of the end of their colonial ambitions in North America, as British forces now held the key to the interior and could press their advantage across the Great Lakes and into Canada. The capture of Fort Niagara had far-reaching consequences beyond its immediate strategic gains. It effectively cut off French supply lines and isolated their remaining forces in Canada, paving the way for subsequent British victories and ultimately contributing to the British conquest of Canada. The victory at Fort Niagara demonstrated the effectiveness of the British military strategy in North America, which focused on seizing key fortifications and controlling vital waterways. The fall of the fort also had a profound impact on the indigenous communities and the complex network of alliances in the region, as it shifted the balance of power and influenced the future course of North American history. The Caribbean, with its chain of islands, was a treasure trove of wealth in the form of sugar plantations. a commodity as valuable as gold in the 18th century. Guadeloupe, a jewel among these islands, epitomized the economic motivations driving European conflicts far from their homelands. The island's rich sugar plantations were sources of immense wealth and symbols of national prestige and power. As 1759 dawned, the British set their sights on Guadeloupe, aiming to seize this valuable asset from the French, in a move that would underscore the global nature of the 7 Years' War. In early 1759, the British launched a concerted effort to capture Guadeloupe, deploying a significant naval force accompanied by land troops to the island. The operation began with a naval bombardment, a show of force meant to intimidate the French defenders and soften the island's fortifications. British soldiers then landed, facing not just the French garrison's resistance, but also the challenges posed by Guadeloupe's rugged landscape. The British commanders, determined to secure a foothold in the Caribbean, pressed their advantage, initiating a siege that would test the mettle of both attackers and defenders. After weeks of intense combat, sieges and skirmishes across the island, the British forces finally secured the surrender of the French garrison in Guadeloupe. The capture of the island marked a significant victory for Britain, not only expanding their colonial possessions in the Caribbean, but also disrupting French economic interests in the region. The fall of Guadeloupe in 1759 highlighted the strategic importance of the Caribbean in the broader canvas of the 7 Years' War, showcasing the extent to which global empires were willing to fight for dominance over these distant, sugar-rich islands. The capture of Guadeloupe by the British in 1759 had far-reaching consequences beyond the immediate joy of victory and the sorrow of defeat. The British now controlled a vital node in the Caribbean sugar trade, a blow to the French economy and a boon for British commercial interests. The victory also sent shockwaves through the colonial world, prompting strategic recalibrations by European powers vying for supremacy in the West Indies. For the island's inhabitants, the transition to British rule brought changes in governance, economic policies, and in some cases, new opportunities and challenges. The capture of Guadeloupe underscored the global stakes of the 7 Years' War, revealing the economic motivations that often drove military campaigns and shaped the fate of empires and colonies alike. The British victory at Guadeloupe was more than a single triumph in a distant battle. It was a strategic coup that significantly bolstered Britain's position in the global contest against France. By seizing Guadeloupe, Britain deprived France of one of its most valuable colonies and demonstrated its naval superiority and its ability to sustain long-range military campaigns. This victory was instrumental in Britain's strategy to control key maritime routes and colonies, a critical component of its broader ambitions for global dominance. In the grand chessboard of international politics, Guadeloupe became a queen captured, significantly tilting the balance of power in Britain's favor. As the 7 Years' War drew to its conclusion, the capture of Guadeloupe emerged as a key factor in the peace negotiations that would reshape the world. The island's fate, along with that of other captured territories, was hotly debated by diplomats seeking to redraw the map of colonial possessions. The significance of Guadeloupe and the Caribbean as a whole was underscored in these talks, as European powers acknowledged the region's economic and strategic importance. The outcome of battles fought in the West Indies, including the struggle for Guadeloupe, influenced the terms of the Treaty of Paris in 1763, marking the end of the war and marking a new era of colonial and maritime rivalry. The war's resolution acknowledged Britain's ascendant position, partly built on victories like the one achieved in Guadeloupe, and set the stage for further imperial competition across the globe. As the guns fell silent and the 7 Years' War drew to a close with the Treaty of Paris in 1763, a new world order emerged from the chaos. The peace treaties redrawn the map of the world, signaling the rise of the British Empire as a dominant global power, particularly in North America and India, while marking the decline of French colonial ambitions. The war's aftermath saw a Europe exhausted by conflict, but transformed by the reshuffling of territories and allegiances. Soldiers returned to their homes, forever changed by their experiences, while civilians faced the daunting task of rebuilding their lives amidst the ruins left by years of warfare. In the midst of the 7 Years' War, William Pitt the Elder emerged as the guiding force behind Britain's military and colonial strategy. Recognizing the war's global nature and the critical role of naval supremacy, Pitt envisioned a bold plan to extend British influence across continents. His ascent to power marked a turning point in the war, as he directed the nation's resources and focus towards achieving dominance in North America and India, key theaters that would determine the balance of global power. Under William Pitt's leadership, the British Royal Navy became the instrument of the nation's will, a formidable force tasked with challenging French dominance at sea. Pitt's strategic foresight led to increased funding for shipbuilding, enabling the Navy to project power across the world's oceans. By securing control of key maritime choke points and engaging French forces in decisive battles, the Royal Navy cut off France's ability to reinforce its colonies, paving the way for British victories abroad. William Pitt's strategic direction led to significant British victories in North America and India, two regions critical to the nation's colonial ambitions and economic interests. The capture of Quebec from the French marked a turning point in the struggle for North America, while the victory at Plassey laid the foundation for British dominance in India. These triumphs were not merely territorial gains, they were stepping stones in the creation of a global empire, fulfilling Pitt's vision of a Britain unchallenged on the world stage. William Pitt. The elder's leadership during the 7 Years' War fundamentally altered the course of history, laying the groundwork for the British Empire's global expansion. His emphasis on naval power and colonial expansion secured Britain's victory in the war and established it as the world's preeminent colonial power. Pitt's legacy is reflected in the vast territories that came under British control, the dominance of the Royal Navy, and the spread of British influence across continents. His vision of a global British Empire shaped the geopolitical landscape of the modern world, leaving an indelible mark on history. In the grand halls of the Russian court, Tsarina Elizabeth stood firm in her resolve to counter the growing influence of Frederick the Great and Prussia. Recognizing the threat Prussia posed to the balance of power in Europe, Elizabeth committed Russia to the anti-Prussian coalition, unleashing one of the most formidable military forces in Europe against her adversary. Under her command, Russian armies surged into the fray, proving to be a significant challenge for Frederick and his Prussian forces, adding to the pressures he faced on multiple fronts. As the war raged on, the Russian army, bolstered by Elizabeth's determination to see Prussia subdued, launched relentless campaigns across Eastern Europe. The vastness of the Russian Empire's resources and the skill of its generals saw Prussian territories besieged, and Frederick's military strategies tested to their limits. The Russian forces, formidable in their strength and resolve, contributed significantly to the encirclement of Prussia, threatening Frederick's reign and the survival of his kingdom. The death of Tsarina Elizabeth in 1762 marked a turning point in the 7 Years' War. Her successor, Peter III, harbored a well-known admiration for Frederick the Great and his military accomplishments. This admiration quickly translated into a dramatic shift in Russian policy, as Peter III sought to reverse Elizabeth's aggressive stance against Prussia. The sudden change caught the courts of Europe off guard, transforming the dynamics of the conflict and offering Frederick a glimmer of hope in a war that had seemed increasingly desperate. In an unexpected turn of events, the enmity between Russia and Prussia thawed, leading to the withdrawal of Russian forces from the war and the establishment of a Russo-Prussian alliance. This reversal of alliances, orchestrated by Peter III's admiration for Frederick and his desire to realign Russian interests, significantly altered the balance of power in the conflict. The once formidable Russian pressure on Prussia was lifted, allowing Frederick to regroup and refocus his efforts on other fronts. The shift saved Prussia from imminent collapse and reshaped the strategic landscape of the 7 Years' War. The death of Tsarina Elizabeth and the subsequent policy shift under Peter III had lasting implications for the outcome of the 7 Years' War and the geopolitical order of Europe. The realignment of Russian and Prussian interests influenced the immediate military strategies of the warring powers and played a crucial role in shaping the peace negotiations that would follow. The Treaty of Paris in 1763, which concluded the 7 Years' War, reflected the dramatic shifts in alliances and power dynamics that had occurred, particularly the unexpected Russian withdrawal from the conflict. This treaty and the war's end heralded a new European order, with Prussia emerging as a stronger state, solidifying its status as a major European power. The strategic decisions made during this period, influenced significantly by the personalities of leaders such as Tsarina Elizabeth and Peter III, demonstrated the profound impact of leadership and diplomacy on the course of history. These leaders, among others, shaped the 7 Years' War through their vision, courage, and sometimes sheer willpower. Their legacies extend beyond the battlefield, influencing the political and cultural landscapes of their nations for generations. The 7 Years' War, a sprawling conflict that spanned continents, was marked by several turning points that decisively influenced its outcome. These pivotal moments, characterized by daring strategies, bold leadership, and sometimes fortune's whim, would determine the fates of empires. In the naval theaters, Britain's mastery of the seas played a crucial role. The year 1759, known as the Annus Mirabilis, or Year of Miracles, saw a series of British naval victories that crippled French naval power and cut off France's overseas supplies. The successful British blockade and the capture of key French colonies underscored the strategic importance of naval supremacy. The Battle of Plassey, June 23, 1757, was a turning point in the global contest between Britain and France for colonial dominance. Robert Clive's victory over Nawab Siraj-ud-Dawla, aided by the betrayal of the Nawab's commander Mir Jafar, secured British control over Bengal, a rich and populous region, laying the foundation for British rule in India. An often overlooked but significant aspect of the war was the diplomatic maneuvering that accompanied military engagements. The secret negotiation of the Treaty of St. Petersburg between Prussia and Russia in 1762, following the accession of Tsar Peter III, a fervent admirer of Frederick the Great, dramatically shifted the balance of power. Russia's withdrawal from the war alleviated the pressure on Prussia, changing the dynamics of the European theatre. The 7 Years' War, a global conflict that reshaped the world, concluded not on the battlefield, but at the negotiating table. The Treaty of Paris, signed on February 10, 1763, along with other agreements, marked the diplomatic endgame of this tumultuous period, sealing the fate of empires and redrawing the maps of continents. The Treaty of Paris established peace between Britain, France, Spain, and Portugal, fundamentally altering the balance of colonial power. France ceded Canada and the lands east of the Mississippi River to Britain, while Spain, allied with France, relinquished Florida in exchange for the return of Havana, captured by the British during the war. These territorial changes signified the rise of the British Empire as the world's preeminent colonial power. In Europe, the Treaty of Hubertusburg restored the status quo ante bellum between Prussia, Austria, and Saxony, with Prussia retaining the contested territory of Silesia. This agreement solidified Prussia's status as a major European power and set the stage for future conflicts over German unification. One of the lesser-known but significant outcomes of the war's conclusion was the impact on indigenous populations, particularly in North America. The transfer of territories disregarded the rights and claims of Native American tribes, leading to future conflicts and hardships. The diplomatic endgame of the 7 Years' War illustrated the complexities of 18th century geopolitics, where victory was not only achieved through military might, but also through strategic negotiations and concessions. The treaties that concluded the war did not bring lasting peace, but laid the groundwork for future conflicts, as the quest for empire continued to drive international relations. The 7 Years' War, often dubbed the First World War due to its global scale, left a lasting legacy that extended far beyond the battlefields and treaty halls. Its aftermath reshaped nations, economies, and societies, setting the stage for the modern era. The war's conclusion saw the rise of the British Empire as the dominant global power, heralding a new age of colonial expansion and trade. Britain's victory laid the foundations for its control over India, parts of Africa, and the Caribbean, establishing an empire on which the sun never sets. However, the financial cost of the war was immense, leading to increased taxation in the American colonies, which sowed the seeds of discontent and eventually contributed to the American Revolution. In Europe, the war affirmed Prussia's status as a major power, setting the stage for future conflicts over German and European dominance. The balance of power strategy that emerged from the war's conclusion would dominate European politics for the next century, culminating in the complex alliances and rivalries that led to World War I. For France, the loss of territories and influence prompted a period of introspection and reform, contributing to the ferment of ideas that would explode into the French Revolution. The war's outcome also shifted the focus of European powers towards the Pacific and Africa, marking the beginning of a new era of colonial expansion and competition. The 7 Years' War also accelerated the exchange of ideas, technology, and culture across the globe. It contributed to the spread of Enlightenment thinking, challenging old monarchies and sparking debates about governance, liberty, and human rights, which would inspire revolutions and reforms across the world. In the wake of the war, the world was more interconnected yet more divided than ever, with the stage set for the rise and fall of empires, the struggle for independence, and the quest for a new order. The legacy of the 7 Years' War has profound impact on the course of history and the shaping of the modern world. In Europe, the war is commemorated for establishing the contours of power that would define the continent until the upheavals of the 20th century. Memorials and museums across Germany, Britain, France, and Austria narrate the tales of bravery, strategy, and the human cost of the conflict, reminding us of the war's role in forging national identities and statecraft. In North America, the war is often seen as a precursor to the American Revolution, a significant chapter in the story of colonial struggle and the quest for independence. Historical sites and reenactments bring to life the battles fought on American soil, teaching new generations about the complexities of empire and resistance. In India, the war marked the beginning of British colonial rule, a period of profound change and lasting influence on the subcontinent's history. The legacy of the war is intertwined with the story of India's fight for independence, reflecting on the double-edged sword of colonialism and the indomitable spirit of its people. Yet beyond the battlefields and the political upheavals, the legacy of the 7 Years' War is found in the evolution of military strategy, international diplomacy, and the concept of a global balance of power. It influenced Enlightenment thought, contributing to debates on governance, sovereignty, and human rights that would inspire revolutions and shape the principles of the modern world order. As we remember the 7 Years' War, we are reminded of the interconnectedness of history, how events set in motion centuries ago continue to influence our present and future. Despite the passage of time, the war's significance remains evident. Its lessons continue to be relevant, providing insights into conflict, the pursuit of power, and the quest for peace in an ever-changing world. Our journey through time, exploring the depths of human ambition, the struggles for power, and the quest for peace, is far from over. It's a journey we embark on together, as a community of curious minds, eager to learn from the past to better understand our present and shape our future. But this journey relies on each of you. Your engagement, your curiosity, and your passion for history are what make this exploration so meaningful. So, if you've found value in our journey through the 7 Years' War, if you've been inspired by the stories of courage, intrigued by the strategies of empires, or moved by the legacy of this global conflict, we invite you to take action. Like this video to support our mission of bringing history to life. Share it with friends, family, and fellow history enthusiasts to spread the knowledge and ignite conversations. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel. Join our community of explorers, thinkers, and learners as we continue to uncover the stories that shaped our world. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Stay curious, stay engaged, and let's continue to explore the vast expanse of history together.